Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be with you all tonight, and more because we have an incredible group of friends today um, who are going to share with us the experience of their lives here in the Valley. But before moving forward to introduce them, I want to introduce my friend, Padre Tony Alvarez, who's going to be leading this conversation with me today. Padre Tony.
Hello, I'm Padre Tony Alvarez from St. Francis Episcopal Church in Turlock, California, and and I am co-hosting this conversation with Padre Nelson Serrano for the Anti-Racism Commission of the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, uh, and this is our celebration, our first celebration of Pride with these wonderful folks who have gathered here today.
It's amazing because we are trying to be very formal today, don't you? Do you think so? We are supposed to be like playing Lady Gaga and other kind of music, but we are very formal here, like in a very academical event. So yes, as Padre Tony mentioned before, this event is sponsored by the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, our diocese, but also for our anti-racism and our immigration commissions of the diocese. And we have different folks with us today. We have Sabun, Dr. April, Matthias, and Basmer. So, but I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves. So, why if we start with Dr. April?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. April Lewis. I am an English instructor at Fresno City College. I am originally from Texas and I moved to the Central Valley, Fresno specifically, in August of 2021. My pronouns are she, hers, and I identify as queer or pansexual.
Thank you, Dr. April. And let's move forward to Saban.
Hi, everyone. My name is Savan Sean. My pronouns are he, they, and she. I am a substance use case manager at the LGBTQ Resource Center. I'm also first generation here in the United States. I was born and raised in Thailand during the Cambodian genocide. I identify as being non-binary. I have 4 beautiful grandkids. I'm a proud father, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Saban. And let's move to Basmer.
Hello to everyone who's watching. My name is Vasmer Bang. I go by they, them pronouns. I am Hmong, queer, non-binary. I'm based here in Fresno, California, where I was born and raised too. Um, and I work as a legal fellow at Oasis Legal Services, where we provide asylum and other immigration direct services for folks who are LGBTQ+. And thank you so much for inviting me and Tony for reaching out.
Thank you, Basmer. And finally, Matthias.
Good afternoon, everyone. Matias Bernal, he, him, L pronouns. I'm originally from Mexico, Mexico City specifically. Came to the United States when I was 14. I am a DACA recipient. I work at Education Leadership Foundation as the executive director for the organization, where we provide immigration legal services, education support, and very special projects. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all for accepting the invitation. So, because you all mentioned your pronouns, I am Nelson Serrano. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a proudly gay man from Colombia. I moved here during the pandemic on March 6, 2020, and then everything went to lockdown. So, and you all know the history. Padre Tony, so when we planned this event, we create some kind of questions for our friends to guide us in kind of a good and lovely conversation about the intersection between race, migration, and being part of the LGBT community. Can you share with our friends who are online a little bit about that experience, about what we expect to have during our panel today?
Yes. So as this panel is sponsored by our anti-racism and immigration commissions, um, And the Episcopal Church is historically Anglo and white institution, like many of our institutions here in Central California. We're hoping that this conversation raises awareness and brings voices from the margins to the center, so that we can be a loving and accepting and affirming place for everyone in our communities, because Central California is a very diverse place, full of people of all ethnicities, races, and backgrounds. And as we know, there are LGBTQ folks of every single background that are present here. And so our conversation will lead us from just kind of our introductory phase to also asking questions about people's experience with immigration, to, if or not, if we, and also experience of growing up as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and also any sort of like religious or spiritual trauma that we have had as members of the LGBTQ plus communities. And of course, we're going to end this conversation with a question on what gives us hope for the future. Because we are not just our struggles, but we are also our hopes and our aspirations, as all human beings are.
Okay, so I think we just check the box of our introductions. And what do you think, guys, if we move forward to the first question? A few of us here are immigrants, and well, immigrants inside of the country, but also outside the country. So, so the first question is, if you are an immigrant, what was your experience immigrating as a member of the LGBTQ plus community? And the second one is, did you experience marginalization, racism, homophobia, or transphobia?
So I think I can get that started by saying that when I immigrated to the United States, I was 14. I was not out. And so that didn't quite show up in the immigration journey, if you will. Coming undocumented meant that I came without inspection. So the way it happened was a little traumatic, if I may say so. But once I made it to the United States and I made it to Fresno directly, it was definitely an adjustment of assimilation, not only for the immigrant part of it, but also the queerness of it as well. I didn't come out until I was in, I think in grad school. And it was not exactly easy doing so in the Central Valley, even if it was 10, 12 years ago. I think that the racism and the oppression shows up in different ways, that it's kind of insidious. It wasn't exactly all vocal and upfront as we might have seen on shows or we might have heard about, but it's more like in the subtle text of conversations, in the no, you shouldn't do this, no, you shouldn't be a part of that group. It's okay if you don't attend kind of spaces. The conversations that would happen around one's identity often did include one being part of that conversation, but discussing whether or not I was queer or not, or being an immigrant or not, and then of course being undocumented or not, were conversations I often heard about me, but it wasn't including me in part of that dialogue, if that makes sense.
So, Matt, if I understand what you're saying, is that often you were talked about, but you weren't invited into that conversation. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it wasn't always by just those that I didn't know, right? Classmates, colleagues. It was sometimes by those I didn't know, some I might have considered friends, and also by professors, by places I did internships about, where I had peers and I had colleagues in the workspace, or trying to join the workspace. And those were the conversations that circle around me, despite, again, not including me as part of that dialogue.
Tabon, if I remember right, your parents were immigrants to this country. How was your experience being son of immigrants as well? Because I mean, you have that part in common. Your parents were immigrants. You both, Sabon and Matias. So, how was your experience on that regard, Sabon?
Sure. I came here in 1986 from the refugee camp in the Philippines. And so at a young age, I was already scared coming to a new country because I was used to behind wires, and we were separated from the native folks and being in a refugee camp. So I've already felt I was less than. And then coming to the States too, um, when we resided, we were in the East Coast, and it was a predominantly Mormon area. So seeing people with white skin scared me. And then the expectation of me eating just regular American food, like me, I remember taking curry to school, and they told me, they asked me, are you eating cats? And as a young boy, and I was already scared because I'm already effeminate. I know I'm pretty feminine. And then for them to ask me that question, it was inappropriate because I knew behind that question there was something. And at a young age, I just knew that I didn't belong. And the way I walked was feminine. Although I thought maybe, I resemble my mom, I love her, and she's beautiful, and I want to be powerful just like her. But it changed my perspective, how I felt about myself. So that was like part of my shame experience as being the way I am, where I'm from, and what I possess within myself. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly respond to that too. I just really appreciate you folks and your vulnerability and sharing your stories too. So on my parents and my family, older siblings also came in 86. So and they came like directly as a result from like US CIA intervention in Southeast Asia. And it was as a direct result, like my ancestors and my older siblings and my parents are all refugees from like the secret war in Laos, which is like in the wider political aspect of what's happening in Southeast Asia at the time. Like I think a lot of folks in the US pay a lot of attention to the Vietnam War, what's happening. And then we think about these other countries in Southeast Asia, like Cambodia and Laos and Thailand, and everything that's happening in like quote unquote in the shadow of Vietnam. But all these things are happening because the US is here and intervening. And it's all the result of just like the white supremacy and imperialism that's happening all across the world, And it's all like totally interconnected because of the involvement of that. So I just really appreciate you sharing that too, because my parents, um, in our history and the Hmong history, also escaped when they were like 5 or 6 years old to Thailand to refugee camps, and then they came in 86 after they met when they were like in their 20s. So most of my older siblings were born in these camps as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that sort of like first person experience.
Thank you, Vasmer. And I also wanted to add that it was difficult for my mom to find jobs too, because of the language and cultural barriers too, and being a single mom. And then for having an effeminate son, just walking with her to doctor's appointments, all kinds of stuff. People were saying a lot of stuff to her too. And I remember she told me that we were getting help from a church, and I remember that they shamed her for practicing Buddhism, and what they said was in relation to having an effeminate son that I would go to hell. And for a mother to hear that your son is going to go to hell, and it really hurt her feelings. And I knew she didn't want to tell me that, but my older sister told me, like, behind my mom's back, like, this is what's going on, this is what mom is dealing with, and just have compassion for her. And she was doing her best as a single mom.
Mm. I'm sorry, Sabun, that's a lot, especially for a young child.
Thank you for sharing, because on your experience, we can identify the experience of so many others. And as Basmer mentioned, thank you for being vulnerable with us. That's very important because a lot of people just think that they are the only ones that are suffering those kind of things, but it's a common experience that we go through and we grow sharing it with others, and we help others sharing that experience. Thank you for doing that, Simon.
And it also, I think, shows the intersection of the questions that we were discussing here in terms of racism, immigration, and homophobia and religious prejudice, all affecting us as queer people of color. It's all connected. So thank you again.
Dr. April, sorry. I am going to my second experience of adolescence, so my voice is changing again. I'm sorry. um, Dr. April, you migrated from Austin here to California. Am I right?
Oh, Dallas.
Dallas. There you go. Close enough.
And to think I didn't think I had anything to contribute to this portion of the panel because I'm just born and raised here in the United States, born and raised in Texas. I'm actually from a very small town in Texas called Texarkana. It's on the Texas and Arkansas border. And I moved to Dallas when I was 10 and then lived in other parts of Texas up until August of 2021. But I suppose I cut you off before you asked the question. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, if I may, I'm gonna share a little bit about my experience of also as an immigrant, because I came from another country, Colombia. So sometimes we experience, and maybe that's common for Matthias, I don't know, because I couldn't hear your accent, Matthias, when you are speaking English, but my accent is very strong. So sometimes I have to repeat myself so many times to be able to understand what I am saying. But well, it was, I took it easy, but now that I'm coming back on my history, I remember the first day I arrived to LAX. It was on 2018, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And it was after a year that I was flying from Colombia to the US like 5, 6 times. So it was strange for a Colombian coming to the US that many times. And at that time, my beard was very long and my hair was a little bit longer. I have a little chonquito here, And at LAX airport, they stopped me and took me to the second check room, and they asked me for my passport, and they said that if that passport was mine of was stolen, that if I was Colombian or not, because my appearance was showing that I was not Colombian, maybe from other part of the world, and all those kind of things just based on my appearance. So it's very, very interesting that we suffer some kind of discrimination because of our race on an appearance, just because of the way you look like.
Or how people perceive you to look like. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Visalia, California, which is about 40 minutes south of Fresno. I'm the son of undocumented Mexican immigrants. My mother's undocumented to this day. I have, my family is of mixed documentation status. And I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in Visalia. Most of my friends and my classmates were second, third, fourth generation. But my first language was Spanish, so I know that Nelson will say that he can't hear my accent, but that doesn't mean that other people don't hear a tiny bit of an accent when I speak, or ask me where are you from? Those little microaggressions. Where are you really from? Where are you really from? You know, or even just assuming that I come from another place. I'm Middle Eastern or from another background, based on their own presuppositions of like what different ethnicities look like.
Yeah, and I remember that the first time I went here in the U.S. to an Starbucks, they asked me for my name to place the order. So I said, "Oh, my name is Nelson." So I was waiting for like 25 minutes for my coffee, and it didn't appear. And the last thing was that the person didn't understand that my name was Nelson because it's a very wide name. So they put like Nestor, and they were calling Nestor for 20 minutes, and Nestor never show up, and it was Nelson. So it was very interesting. Padrecito, can you guide us to the next question, please?
Absolutely. So if you grew up in this country, what was your experience growing up here as a member of the LGBTQ plus community?
If I may, I'll start us off. So yes, like I said, originally from Texas, moved to California almost 3 years ago. For me, I came out later in life. And by later, I want to say I was in graduate school working on my master's degree. And that's when I came out. And to add an extra layer to it, not only was I in my mid-20s, I also came out in a very rural part of Texas. When I tell you the population was about 8,000, including the college. And I was unfortunately outed by someone who I thought was a friend of mine. And because I wasn't quite ready to come out in that particular moment in time, because I was at work with other students and people nearby, I kind of retreated and downplayed it, and I stayed in the closet again, had to come out again. So my coming out experience has been ongoing. When I tell you I'm still coming out, even in the matter of like 2 weeks ago, because I'm often asked, like, wait, you're not straight? And I'm like, what gave it away? What gave it away? Or it's a surprise plot twist when I just casually mentioned, oh yeah, back when I had a boyfriend, back in 2017, they're like, you're not gay, you're not a lesbian? And I'm like, I never said I was. So for me, I sometimes deal with the nuances of, I don't look queer. And it kind of comes out even in the various spaces that I take up. Like sometimes I feel like if I'm not wearing something rainbow affiliated, I feel like, oh no, I just blend in a little too well. And I don't want to do that. And for me, moving to California was kind of a fresh start for me. It's not to suggest that I wasn't out in Texas. I was. Plenty of my friends knew that I was queer, and they loved and supported me all the same. They're still a great community of mine, even from afar. But definitely coming to California was like a fresh start. And even though I was told pretty early on when I got here, like, oh, you couldn't have ended up in a more conservative part of California, like, oh, it's so conservative. You're gonna be, are you gonna be okay? And I sometimes tell people conservative light. if you knew where I came from, you would know that Fresno for me is still vastly different and maybe a little more liberal than people give it credit for. And I am just so happy to be a part of this space and building a community here.
April, you mentioned a few things that like really resonated with me too. I think the concept of like a coming out sort of moment, like there isn't like a single moment. It's always like a journey. And I guess in my perspective, like coming out is pretty much having a vulnerable, like preparing yourself and being vulnerable. Sometimes when you come out, it's not even like you're preparing for something, it just suddenly happens. Um, and so I really appreciate that concept too, because that's definitely like pretty central in our lives. I think even if we've said we've come out or out as a certain like queer identity, there still might be some people that we wouldn't feel comfortable coming out to either, too, because it wouldn't be a safe space or wouldn't be the right folks for you to do that. And it's interesting because I mean, as Pride's around the corner too, like there's this expectation that it's Pride, like you should go out there, you should express yourself, you should show as queer as you are. Um, which I would encourage as well, up to your comfort level and up to what's safe for you and where you are at in this life. Because me 20 years ago, I wouldn't have felt safe coming out in an environment where folks um, wouldn't be supportive of me, wouldn't even consider the idea of validating any of my queer identities. I think the entire, concept of coming out is important to think and consider that every single year there's like you transforming and becoming a different person as someone who you are and being more authentic to yourself and being more queer as you journey through your life too. And so I just really appreciate you bringing that concept up too. And then you also mentioned something about like, well, do I look queer enough? Do I look gay enough? Like how would give it away? I was like, girl, yeah, like it's just like interesting because it makes me think of, the idea and concept of intersectionality, where it's not just like your sexual orientation or not even like your gender identity, but then to also talk about like different systems of oppression, like patriarchy, like the dominance of like male voices and presence in so many conversations we have in queer spaces, not just like white folks, but like men in the conversation as well. And so I think for me to be non-binary and totally reject the social construct of like male or female, like just that aspect, is to also like talk about the liberation of people who are not just like cisgender men. And so I just really appreciate the fact that the way people perceive us is how they will judge us. And if you're not masculine enough, or not feminine enough, or if you're not gender not conforming enough, then they're going to judge you a certain way where none of that even matters because your identity is your identity and you validate yourself and what you know who yourself to be is your full queer self. So um, just a couple of things you said that kind of resonated with me.
Very well said.
I'll hop on. Thank you for saying that. I do want to say that it's been an evolution for me since coming out. I came out in my teens. I told my mom that I was bisexual, and that was in fear of her rejecting me. Like at least there's a chance of liking women to reproduce, to carry the last name, right? And I said that, and it turns out she didn't care. She just wanted a grandchild. She didn't care. But it's that fear. It was instilled in me as a child to carry that into as a young adult. And I've noticed that over the years, it's been pretty toxic too for the masculinity within our queer community. Because I'm Asian, I'm not hairy, I don't have a big chest, I don't fit the the poster child for what is sexy. And then for me being non-binary too, it's like where do I belong in this community? And so for me, it's been just going inward, self-searching, and knowing who I really am, my values, my worth. And it's been quite an education to learn about what gender is, the construct of that, and to have conversations about that. We have a support group here, and we talk about that. What I love about the LGBTQ, the Q is not just queer, it's also questioning. So that reduces the likelihood of suicide self-harm, because that's big in our community, and it's within the youth. And then for folks that are not caught up with the education, with the lingos, the terms, the vocabulary, it's super important. And so I want to say that it's important for visibility for our older folks as well, and for the younger folks as well. And so it's been quite an education to learn about my sexuality, my gender, where I belong. And it's good that we have all the resources out there, and to have a conversation like this to talk about it. It's, well, I don't remember somebody asking me about my gender. It's not important for them, so, but it's important for me, and it's important for me to ask folks that about their gender journey. So hopefully that shed some light in our community, and save some lives.
I just want to resonate with a lot of what everybody said, because I feel very similarly to those experiences. While I am more male presenting, and the facial hair, and there is an accent, Nelson. It's in there. It's just, it hides. So trust me, it's in there. I think my journey on that has been similarly to y'all's in that space, and also bringing a little bit more present, coming out on almost like a weekly basis, like Dr. Lewis mentioned, in professional spaces, and normalizing that for those that are in that space that might be questioning, that might be sorting their own identities, I think is really important, especially when working in education settings. And the reason why I bring that up is because when I was a high school student, we had a lot of ideas about one teacher who we kind of thought maybe wasn't really out, but kind of gave hope to those of us that were queer, that he might be queer as well. And I understand his sentiment of not coming out. I later found out, like 12 years later, that he was in fact queer, and he chose not to be out at that point as a way to protect himself in his job, even here in California. And so fast forward now, it's important to be really present in all of our identities in the personal and professional spaces. And so normalizing things like my boyfriend, my partner, my fiance, it really allows space for others to know that it's safe, and to know that they can engage in that same language. At ELF, for instance, a year ago, when I came on board 2 years ago, but a year ago exactly, we had fellows. So these are college students that came on. And in our application, we have something as simple as your name, last name, so on and so forth. And they brought up the lack of pronouns. How come pronouns are not in there, right? And we have a lot of folks that identify as non-binary, and they utilize pronouns they. So it allows us to look inwards to say we want to normalize that as much as we can. So we even went back to update our handbook to replace he and she with employee, to make it gender neutral, so that it's more open and welcoming to all those new future employees, but also our volunteers and so on. So I think it's important to always be in the forefront about that as well.
Thank you all. I think a lot of what you all said really resonated with me, especially April, when you talked about coming out as this journey that happens all the time. That's a reality. I find myself coming out, on a continual basis. Also normalizing that in the church, and speaking about my husband. I am a married gay priest. Unfortunately, the reality is that in certain, even in a denomination that has non-discrimination based on sexual orientation in their rule book, so to say, I still had to think about it, to say, okay, I am going to be saying, here's my husband, and not thinking twice about it. But that's a journey in and of itself. And also, like Matias, I'm definitely male presenting, and identify as cisgender male. But how I present my gender very much varies from, where I am based. Is it a professional setting? Am I with my friends? Do I, am I going to bring out my clack fan? you know, um, it even those of us who are, are still on one side of this, gender construct, gender binary, um, play along the spectrum. Um, and and that is normal. But we find ourselves pressured into, conforming to these, unwritten rules about how we should and shouldn't act. Even those of us who are queer, um, and we want liberation and for everyone, and that includes people who uh, it includes all people.
I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Colombia, and I came out to my family when I was 23, 24, which means 13, 14 years ago. Please don't start to use your fingers to realize how many years I am. Please don't do that. but but as you all mentioned, we are coming out every day. So because first I came out to my family, and actually my mom helped me to come out with a lot of my family because she was processing. So she was like, "Oh my God, Nelson is gay. Let me talk to my father. Let me talk to one. Let me talk to another." And they were like, "Oh my God, that's fine. No worries." I think she was more worried than I was about being gay. But what was really interesting was my experience here in California, because I came out as a gay priest. So for my congregation, because during the first 2 years I was like very like, I mean, if you ask me, I will tell you. That's all. But I was like, like I don't need to share that with everybody. But a year ago, they asked me to record a video for the Episcopal Church at the national level. And so I did it, and I came out. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, Padre, we knew you were. That's one of the reasons we are here." So they, "Oh, okay. I guess it was easy to identify." Uh, so it was for me very interesting, but in some cases it's difficult with some people to to come out, and more in this country, in this context, or in the context of the Central Valley, because still we are California, but we are in a most conservative area compared with San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and the big cities in this state. And thank you all for sharing all your experiences. Um, so we have the next question, and it's short to related. If you grew up in the church or other religious community, what message or messages did you receive about being a sexual or gender minority?
I can go ahead and start us off with this question. So in the Hmong community, a lot of folks practice shamanism, but my family converted to Southern Baptist Christianity before I was born. So I was born into a Southern Baptist church. So I spent most of my life until I was like 23 in like a Southern Baptist church. And it was like a very conservative church. It was also an ethnic church. There was just Hmong folks there too. A lot of folks in the church community had sponsored a lot of like Southeast Asian folks to come to the US. I believe that's how it started with our family too. And so my experience was like definitely not positive in like a very like conservative Southern Baptist church, especially since it was like in the Hmong ethnic church too, which is not traditionally accepting or validating of like anybody in a queer identity. Especially since there's like no language like in our community to talk about the different queer identities we have. Like we have to use like entire phrases or sentences just to explain who we are, right? So there's no vocabulary that exists. And without vocabulary that doesn't exist, it's hard to communicate in the first hand, right? Even if even if you are fluent in the Hmong language, right? And so I think there's like so many barriers and boundaries because of that. But specifically in answering this question about the church, when I was 19 or 20, I had like this experience where I was, panicking, and I had not come out to anybody else before. I wasn't even validating in my own queer self. Like, I didn't validate I was gay or anything. It was more like God sees me as like an abomination, and I need to change myself. I need to lessen myself and try to keep praying to God, keep praying to Jesus, and keep changing myself so that I can be this like straight person. So my family could be happy, so my church could be happy, so I can belong in this community that I grew up in. Um, so that's been my entire like sort of like childhood growing up in church too. And I actually did love going to church, and did love like being part of leadership in church too. And so when I had come out, I don't know if I call it coming out, but it was more like, hey, I'm struggling with this sin of homosexuality, to my like youth director at the time. His response was to send me to conversion therapy when I was 19. And so when I talk about conversion therapy, I think there's so much context around like people think like about the movie, like, but I'm a cheerleader, or they think about like all these experiences that folks have, like people with a lot of money, they send like their kids to camps and whatnot. So my director had like spent money for me to go to a local sort of conversion therapist here in Fresno. I don't know if they're still existing. I don't know if they're still alive, but I went to like traditional talk therapy for a year and 3 months. And so, and I went at the time when I was like 19, 20 willingly too, because in my mind, it was like, I do need to change myself. Like I do need to like become straight or become like this. But absolutely, all this is like totally super shammy, fake therapy, very harmful for everybody who goes through it. Um, but I stopped going because this person had actually whipped out a switch knife at like my last session with him. Is because I told him like, what if God wanted me to be gay? What if God wanted to be queer? And then he pretty much said, well, let me tell you a story about somebody in our church who went to Thailand for a sex change. And so he brought up this whole other story, which is really strange and really weird. And then he got really angry, and he said, and then he brought out like a switch knife, and he said, well, let me tell you something about Buddhists. And I was like, why are we talking about Buddhism? This is weird. Like, and he said, well, Buddhists, this is totally inaccurate too. Like, what he said was that Buddhists believe that everything around them is like a dream state, like it's not real. But he said with this knife, he said, well, I bet you if I like put this in somebody's kneecap, they wake up to the reality to see that this is reality. Like, and he brought this whole analogy to say that God never told me, God never intended me to be gay or queer. And at the time, like I'm super young, like I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm just saying, like, I just nodded my head. I was like, whatever, I need to survive this moment so I can get the hell out of here and never see you again. And so, like overall, conversion therapy is horrible. It's terrible. Um, and like I eventually had to move myself away from like so many people that I grew up with in church. And it was actually one of the most painful decisions I've had to make, because back when I was younger, like my church was my second family, it was my community. But um I eventually left when I was like 23 years old, and I started to come out and started to date like other men too. And so, yeah, like there's so much religious trauma behind so many conservative churches who have a creed, like it's in like their base beliefs that queer people and gay people are not valid and not real. And any of us who actually go through it, like we're going through a phase, or we're just being sinners, right? We're deviant from the religious norm. Um, so I think so many young queer people, or queer people in general who are in church, cover themselves so much so that they can belong in the community that they do love. And it's so hard just to leave, right? And so that's been my experience to grow up in church. And I don't think I've ever healed from that experience until I met other like progressive Hmong people and other Hmong queer people who helped like validate me from my experience, because I didn't receive any sort of validation from the Hmong community itself. And when I did, that was the most healing, transformative experience I had, like back in 2018 when I met these folks. And so religious trauma can like run deep. But I just wanted to share that bit because that was my experience in a church.
I'll share mine. So when we came to the States, my mom, she was set up with a sponsor at the church, and and I remember them telling my mom that she needs to get rid of the statue of Buddha, and she was not allowed to light incense. It was demonic. And mind you, my mother, she escaped a concentration camp in Cambodia. And the only thing that kept her alive was praying silently to escape this war and to come to the States, and was denied of her practice. And so, but we were on survival mode. You know, we came to the States. None of us speak English. My mom was trying to get jobs. She worked at a chicken factory. She worked as a maintenance person at a laundromat, jobs where it doesn't require you to speak much. And my mother, she was a very intelligent woman. She did the best she could, but what we did was we just moved out of the town. My mother made that hard decision, like, I'm gonna choose my faith than rather be rejected by these people and told not to pray in my own belief, because we believe in ancestors too. That was part of our practice. When we light an incense, we're also including acknowledging our ancestors. It's very sacred to us. And we were denied of that. That's denying our own bloodline. And if that's very sacred. And so that was our experience. And my other experience is that when I was newly getting sober in 2011, I remember going to a church and I was like super desperate. I was super desperate. My mom had cancer. And I just remember walking by a church. This guy said, I'll pray for your mom. And I was like feeling really broken. Like I was totally torn inside. I felt so empty. And I was given some hope. And I remember they had a prophetic reading. And out of nowhere, they called me to the front and they compared being gay bestiality. And I remember just breaking down crying. I was like, I have never experienced such humiliation. And my intention was to ask him to pray for my mother, but they manipulated the situation. And I remember the lady that said she'll help me, she gave me this oil and she said, I can give this to you. You can give this to your mom. But I just want to let you know that if you don't change your ways, you're going to go straight to hell. And it would be an embarrassment on my mom's deathbed. So it was traumatic. Like, imagine trying to get sober, you're learning about yourself. And I'm glad like things didn't work out. And I kept my faith. I kept doing what I did with my mom, and I was able to be by her bedside when she passed away. And I'm grateful that my ancestors walked with me and gave me the strength and the courage to keep doing what we were doing. And I'm just gonna be honest, like I don't think that was love. I think that was manipulation. I think that was fear. And it had nothing to do with love. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I have my faith, my ancestors, and my higher power. And it's great that for Pride we have so many spiritual centers marching at the Pride Parade. Like New Thought has been a good spiritual center for me to go to. They're so loving. They have families. They have ceremonies. It's so sacred. And you know, I'm rich with support today. I'm really grateful.
So sorry to hear about that awful experience you had to. That's just devastating. Um, I did grow up in a Christian household. When we came to the United States, one of the first things that my aunt, who lived here and had established a community, told my mom was that one of the ways to help was to go to church. And so we were going to this Christian church in Fresno for probably a good 8 years. I didn't particularly love going to church on Sundays because it was really early. But I did enjoy the messages of love and the singing. There was a lot of really great songs that I still really like up to this date. But it was at a time where it was very difficult to be queer. It was not talked about. The only times that the message came up or the subject came up, it was in terms of sinners, right? And wanting to repent and wanting sinners to come see the light and, follow the message of Jesus and so on. And it was really hard to hear that on an ongoing basis, on a weekly basis. I made the decision, I think I was 19, 18, to no longer go to church because I didn't feel like it was welcoming to me as an individual. Though I hadn't come out quite yet, I did feel like it wasn't a safe space. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was really harming and damaging to go to those spaces and to hear that ongoing message. And I distinctly remember a point around 2008. We had Proposition 8 in California, and they were talking about that quite openly to support it and to restore family values and so on. And I remember that when the proposition passed, the pastor made it a point to celebrate that. So everybody stood up and, cheered and clapped and so on. And I stayed sitting. I felt like that was my silent way of resisting that. And my mom turned to me and said, aren't you happy we won? And it was one of the most hurtful times, I think, in my young life. And when I did come out, I think I was to my mom at least, she took me to see a Christian therapist that was recommended by the pastor to address, this issue in a very quiet manner. And luckily, the therapist wasn't exactly what you would see on the shows, that they're manipulative and horrible. She did made it clear she thought I could be fixed with enough guidance, but she also made it clear that she knows that sometimes that you can be fixed, and that's okay too. So in a very small way, it was like a shimmer of light, if you will, but quite quite hard to see that in that point, especially at that age. And I think that story just highlights like the ongoing messages of some of the religious institutions. Um, Once I was no longer living at home and I made my own decision, so to speak, I made it a point never to go back to church, to walk away from that altogether. And it wasn't until 2016 that I went back to church. It might have been 12 years after I left, 10 years or so. And I went to a Christian church, but the reason I went to that one, it was a UCC church here in Atascadero, was because at the Pride Parade, they had participated and the pastor was openly queer. And so I felt like, huh, there is a community in that space because, like I said, I did enjoy the music and I did enjoy the family style and the community that it brought. I just didn't enjoy the messages of hate. So coming back to it as an adult and finding the right church was really important to me, and I have continued being a part of the UCC church since then. And it's important to find the right spiritual guide for those of us that choose to follow that.
Oh, out of all the questions that y'all gave us for this evening, this one was probably the toughest one for me. Um, I I was brought up Christian, but for some reason, my family and I, we didn't really go to church that often. Like I can maybe count on maybe one hand how many times we went as a family. So I didn't think it was, that big a deal or that important. And, even when I went off to college, I would mostly just go to church with friends because I wanted to fit in with my friends, and some of them kind of lured us college kids in with free food. I still remember getting free food on Wednesdays, and I was just like, "Oh, okay, this part's fine. This is okay." Um, and I mostly just, maintained my own relationship with God. Like I still prayed, I still do, but going to church wasn't one of those things that was like, oh, I need to do this. And then fast forward to about, I want to say 2014, 2015, I was probably more involved in the church. And then I want to say by about 2018 is when that stopped. And it's not because the church itself or the congregation or the leaders said anything particularly unbecoming about sexuality. It was just kind of quietly understood. I think that was the closest thing I could ever fathom of don't ask, don't tell that didn't take place in the military. it felt like it took place in the church. Like we just don't talk about it. Like I'm sure there were plenty of gay parishioners and congregants there, but I don't know, they just either blended in or they came for a little while and then stopped coming. And if anything, I don't think I needed the church to hear hate and religious rhetoric directed against me for my sexuality. It actually came from my parents. And unfortunately, they still have not come around. They are homophobic, and I know that I cannot talk to them about anything in my life pertaining to sexuality. They would probably be appalled that I am on this panel today. I still remember my mom flailing on the bed, furious that I could be, in her eyes, gay and a sinner. I still remember sitting at my dining room table crying my eyes out because at this point my stepdad is telling me that I am going to hell and that any other because at that time I come out as bisexual because I felt like, that's an easier label for them to understand. And he basically just said, that's the worst thing that I could be, even though he has a gay daughter who is married to a woman. I'm not sure where the disconnect happened there, but in any case, being told by family who have raised me that they do not accept this part of me, and knowing that they don't accept it, and I've had to change my access to them accordingly, has been hard. It has absolutely been hard. People ask me constantly, am I going back to Texas? Do you miss your parents? Do you miss your family? When are you going back to Texas? Could you see yourself moving back to Texas? And my answer to all of that is an emphatic no. I'm not going back to Texas unless it's for a visit or probably, unfortunately, if somebody passes. I don't like who I become when I am around my family sometimes. I love them from a distance, but I know that unless I am talking to them about this guy or guy prospect that I might be romantically interested in, unless it's that, they are not trying to hear it. And that's heartbreaking. And I wish that I could say that that doesn't factor into my decision making to not go to church. It does, because something went awry somewhere. And again, even though it wasn't explicitly delivered to me in the church, my parents are Christian, read the Bible. Somewhere something happened, and that's enough to make me leery about being in those spaces. But that's not to say that I wouldn't point someone to religious or spiritual services in my capacity as an educator if it came up. Something that I'm seeing through Fresno Pride and through other means of seeing religious figures such as yourselves, fathers, at these Pride events, and being able to take the shuttle bus, and I end up sitting by some rainbow pride wearing Catholics being like, we're on our way to Fresno Pride. Like, how are you? That to me gives me that glimmer of hope and optimism. I know we're kind of bleeding into the last question, but that's what comes to mind for me, that's powerful and it gives me hope.
Thank you all for sharing. Those are very powerful histories, and that brought memories about my experience as well. I remember that, well, I grew up Roman Catholic in Colombia. My family prayed the rosary every night. And uh, coming back on my memories, I will say that I realized that I was gay since I have memory. I mean, the first time I felt attraction for a person was when I was in third grade. I would say 8, 9 years, and it was one of my of the kids at the school and the same grade, and it was interesting because I enjoyed to play with him, and it was my first memory. But then I start to go to church, and I hear messages that you just hear, and I remember that on 2009 when I came out to my mom, she took me to one of the priests that I was working when I was a Roman Catholic seminarian, and he said, "You know that because you are gay, you're gonna go to hell, don't you?" And I was like, "Oh, I know that," and that you're excommunicated of the church. And he said, "Oh, I know that." So on 2011, I became Episcopalian. So my mom is a very well-intentioned lady. Now she's very supportive and she's very happy with my fiance. But at that point, she was trying to fix something that she thought was broken or wrong. So she took me to that priest again, and he said, "Oh, by the way, you know that we are also communicated because you are now attending the Episcopal Church because you are now Protestant." And I said, "Well, I guess I am because with one foot, I am living. I am out of the church because I'm gay, and now with the other, I am also because I am Protestant. So there you go. I'm with my 2 feet on the on hell." So, so it was very interesting coming out from my mom, but from that priest. But it's so sad to hear how the church makes damage on our personal lives. And maybe I'm not the correct person because I'm a person of color, no, and also a gay person, but I'm a priest, a representative of the church. I apologize because the churches are doing a lot of damage.
I echo what Father Nelson says. As a priest of a church, I also apologize for all the damage that churches have done in the lives of queer folks. I think we're running short on time, so I have to say that with all of you, I share also quite a bit of religious trauma from my own upbringing and from my own involvement in the church. But again, we are running short on time, and I think some of our panelists have to make an exit.
Yeah, I'm sorry to take off, folks, but I really appreciated the conversation. And I want to thank you both, Father Tony and Father Nelson, for inviting me to be a part of this great panel with amazing folks. So I will excuse myself and leave you to it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you for joining us. Padrecito, last question to finish our conversation.
Okay, so here is our last question, and April, you touched upon it. So, especially in light of all the younger queer folks who may or may not be thinking about coming out, but what is giving you hope for the future right now?
That I get to teach another group of LGBTQ plus students, especially at Fresno City College, if I may do a quick plug. I am so proud to teach in the first year experience program at Fresno City College. And one of the cohorts that I get to teach is the LGBTQ plus cohort. This is the second year that it will be a cohort on our campus. And I'm just so happy to see that. And you know what? Even the students who are not a part of that LGBTQ cohort, they're still representing in my other classes. And I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to teach our young people, to have a hand in their educational and academic experience. And, you know, as cliche as it sounds, the kids are going to be all right in their own way. They may do a bunch of TikToks and random dances along the way that I don't always understand, but they're going to be all right.
I can share just a bit. I guess in the spirit of vulnerability and the spirit of just being transparent too, like that is actually a really difficult question for me to answer because, and I think that's totally okay too. I think we're all in different places, and I think it's totally valid to just like validate yourself and how you're actually feeling. Um, I think in my conversation, my journey to as a queer person, a queer like non-binary Hmong person, like it's difficult because there's still like very, very like horrible, terrible things that are happening with queer folks right now still too. And I think so many folks who are activists or so many folks who are just trying to speak out against everything that's happening. You could talk about it here in the Central Valley, in other countries, in the US, because we experienced that in the US too for queer and trans folks. It's an ongoing thing. And you know, there's still so much going on in this world too that it's hard to hold on to hope, right? Because a lot of us are trying to bring to light all the violence and all the hate that's happening to the queer community, right? Um, I think for me in answering that question, I think my community has been like so central, making sure that I have a space to like talk about these things, process things too. Like if it wasn't for like the people I trust and love in my life, who's been there for me in like my darkest periods, then I wouldn't be standing here today, right? I think it's so important for like queer folks to like try to find these spaces that, you know, where they feel belonged, where they feel like they can so I'm thinking of like this acronym that somebody taught me recently. It's like three B's, like believe, belong, forget the last B, but but it's these like community organizations and these Hmong queer folks that really foster a space for me to make sure that I'm continuing to heal and continuing to move forward and also uh hold space for other folks who are like that too, right? And so I think for me, in thinking about hope, um it comes to a place where like you have to start off with acceptance and come to a place where you have to like come to a place where you want to heal and also process all the negative emotions too, because how else will you like work through it unless you like really accept and address all the negative things that do happen as well. And so for me, like having hope and pushing forward is going to continually be a journey, and so you always use your community so they can be there and present in your life so you can uh press forward with them as well.
So thank you folks for sharing that. I feel really inspired to hear that. And for me, what gives me hope is that people are curious of wanting to learn about our community. And that's how you gain allyship. And then we have accurate information, not misinformation off of TikTok or whatever it is those resources are. What I love is that I work with youth, and the youth are so dang smart. They're so smart. And anytime that I share a subject with them, even just getting a job for the first time, they share with me like this is how I want to show up in the world. And you know, they're onto something. They're onto something. They dare to be themselves. And I think that reminds me, Savan, you dare to be yourself unapologetically. You have to show up unapologetically. If you don't, people don't know you exist. And if people don't know you exist, they don't know how to show for themselves. So it's for people that showed me what it looks like and having those scars and being so brave. And I dare to take rejection. And these youth just reminds me that it's going to be okay. And I'm just really grateful that I get to see folks, young folks that are curious and just want to shine. And spaces like this that you guys just inspire me, and you know, that's enough hope for me. And we're gonna be in safe hands because we're gonna keep fighting the good fight. And I see a bright future for all of us. So we got to keep celebrating, big or small, even the little small wins. We gotta celebrate those. We all have joy. We all have courage. We all have love, compassion. We have that. We have beautiful lights within us. All of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us and participating and sharing, especially in your vulnerability, and sharing your experiences. Hope is a difficult topic. We are living in difficult times, as Vasmir has said, and it's not like we have had just gone from better to better. We have seen so many setbacks and so many so much that has seemed to go backward in terms of queer rights and queer even safety and all across this country. So much pushback, so much misinformation. I know that people people are seeing their rights eroded across this country, and that is very much a reality, and it's very much a reality among queer communities of color, especially, who are most vulnerable. And I am hopeful in the resilience that our communities have shown. We are here. I see it in the faces before me, people who are unapologetic, who aren't afraid to show up as themselves. We gift the world with ourselves, and that takes courage, and that takes hope. Sometimes that is a difficult choice, but I am filled with hope in seeing us all come together in conversation like this. I think that we are trying to be good stewards of our time and your time. This has been a lovely conversation, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Padre Nelson, and he is going to close us out this evening.
So thank you all, and just to connect the conversation, a few fast stops. What gives me hope? Gives me hope to have you here today. That gives me hope, because you are very smart, lovely, spiritual, and sweet people who are sharing your life experiences with others. And that's important, because others needs to hear your voice. I bet you a lot of young people are gonna feel encouraged for your words. Second, gives me hope, access to education. It's difficult, but if people is educated, they will change their minds about those kind of bad ideas that sometimes churches, sometimes miscommunications are perpetuating. And also gives me hope, our Central Valley, that day by day is growing in diversity. And that's really important, because we know that a diverse community makes all those ghosts of the past to disappear, giving space to new things, new ways of living the life, and new ways of living, in our case, the gospel of Jesus, that is about love. I know that you guys are representing also different organizations, and you may have also information to share. So I want to open this space a few minutes for you to share information about your organizations or last comments and thoughts before we close up.
I wanted to share some resources for LGBTQ plus immigrant folks. So I work at Oasis Legal Services, and we provide directly with services for asylum seekers, for those wanting to seek for residency. We do VAWA cases as well, so family petitions. We also do citizenship help there as well too. So we do sort of a continuum of care model. So from the get-go, for all of our asylum clients, we help them all the way until citizenship, so that can be a path to citizenship for like undocumented folks. So if folks listening right now or know somebody who wants to seek asylum or seek that as a path or has more questions about it, you folks can definitely contact Oasis Legal Services. I know this is like recorded, so I'm just gonna say the number. I should have been a bit more prepared how to share information, but the phone number for Central Valley Fresno folks is 559-777-6786. And so that's our intake line, and you can begin a conversation to see if asylum could be a path for you, or if we have more questions about what other pathways there are to citizenship, or if you have more questions about the services we provide, definitely feel free to contact that number. And I just want to mention one last bit about another side of services we provide too. We also provide like social services for all our clients as well. So we want to make sure we provide like wraparound services for all of our asylum seeker clients as well. So if you are someone who knows someone, if you yourself or someone who is queer, LGBTQ+, or you know somebody who is also queer, LGBTQ+, please refer them over to Oasis Legal Services, and we can help at that point.
I will share at our center. We're downtown, Fresno EOC LGBTQ Resource Center. We're right across from the health department, and we have support groups on Tuesdays at 6 to 8 o'clock. It's a structured group. It's ICSI. It's an adult support group. And then at 6 o'clock, same day on Tuesdays, it's a Black queer group. So it's fabulous. It's growing, amazing. So I want to offer that. And then on Wednesdays, we have the hybrid youth support group that I facilitate. And on the second, third, and fourth Thursday, we have Down with the System. It's a trans support group for gender expansive folks. And it's fabulous. Check it out. We have our website. And what else? I think the last thing is that Illuminate Pride is coming up. We're going to have a street festival on the 29th. It's from 5 to 9 o'clock. We have a drag show. It's going to be amazing. And there's going to be a lot of resources and other agencies there too. So I invite you to come.
I'll be there, by the way. Dr. April, do you have last comments?
Well, Savon already shared Black Queer Fresno. I'll go on ahead and plug that you can also follow Black Queer Fresno on Instagram. Feel free to look for us there. As far as any resources, I work at Fresno City College. It's a wonderful campus. If those of you out there that have been contemplating going back to school or going to school for the first time, just know that Fresno City College is an affirming campus. We are putting in that work, intersectionality, anti-racism, LGBTQ plus affirming. We're continuing to fight the fight, and there are people there that that may look like you who will rock with you, even if we're not decked out in our rainbows and pride colors all the time. Just know that Fresno City College and our sister campuses through the State Center Community College District are here for you. So that's the only major resource that I have.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And on behalf of Bishop David Rice, the faithful people of the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, on behalf of Padre Tony, and also on my behalf, I want to thank you for your time, for all your words and your teachings are tough, and more than everything, for being vulnerable with us. That's very important. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. It's very important. And my final comment goes to all those kids, young people who are coming out. Uh, we all know, because we hear our experiences, that coming out is difficult. It's never going to be easy, but you have in us resources. And if we are located in different parts of the Central Valley, Visalia, Fresno, Turlock. So if you are in the area of this diocese, which is from Bakersfield all the way to almost Sacramento, Padre Tony and I are willing to connect you with the correct people in the correct place to help you in that process. We are here for you. So please let us know how can we help. And let us close in prayer. To God, we give thanks for the opportunity of being vulnerable, for the opportunity of sharing our lives with others, for the opportunity of being instruments of healing, and also for being instruments of hope. May we continue doing God's job in this world, being a blessing for others, sharing God's love to everybody. Amen. Thank you all. Have a good night. And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Yeah, and
you.
thank
Have a
you.
good night.
And thank you to all the people that are watching the live stream. I didn't say that. We had 20 people in different platforms watching the live, so it was incredible. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.